And yet, you know, I can share with you that there was great insecurity in the marriage, but hey, there was a lot of insecurity out of the marriage. So here I was on the other side of insecurity and finding my way through life. And yet things started intensifying as far as unusual experiences. I'm thinking particularly of a day in May in 1986 when my daughter and I were coming out of a store and I saw a triangular object float or drift over the shopping center, and it looked like it was on a collision course with a plane taking off from the airport. I'll tell you, at that time I dismissed it as an hallucination because I was going through the stress of the separation and divorce, and nobody else seemed to see it. At least I didn't see anybody else seeing it. My daughter saw it. And we both kind of breathed a sigh of relief when there was no collision. What happened was the triangular object seemed to disappear. It simply disappeared. Again, no real context in life for that, in my activities and my needs at the time. So I stored it away in my mind, but gave it no particular significance. It wasn't until 1987 that all of this began to take on perspective for me. I think I should start with March 5th of 1987. That is when things seemed to take off in a very significant direction. I had a dream, and it pertained to a field outside of a village where I lived for the first 6 years of my life. I'm familiar with this field from childhood. It doesn't hold any particular significance for me, but it's a real place on the physical plane. Yet in this dream, I was standing outside the field, and as I looked out over the field, I saw 3 craft hovering, rotating, moving about, and they were beaming blue rays of information into rocks. They were saucer-shaped objects, quite luminous, simple, elegant, and beautiful. And the blue rays were quite exciting to see. In the dream, I wanted to step into the scene and gather up some of those rocks for my family. And now I think my family represents humanity. So I stepped eagerly into the scene, and the next thing I knew, one of the craft rotated and beamed me square in the face with a blue ray. Well, the impact was quite startling. And yet, I knew that was what I had wanted to happen. Even though it was an extremely powerful impact, I felt quite good about it. The dream concluded with a picture of myself getting ready to do some sort of presentation for the public, in which I felt quite happy, quite centered, quite certain. And then I got up and I went to work that day, right? Well, I probably would have forgotten about that dream if it weren't for the events that occurred that day. At the time, I was working at a university in the International Studies department, and I kind of think now that's a bit of a cosmic joke because it wasn't too long after that my whole life became intergalactic studies. But that day, people noticed something different about me. I know I felt wonderful. There was no question about that. I felt unusually wonderful. And at one point during the day, I'll never forget, I was standing beside a professor, as I usually did at that time during the day, and suddenly he looked around and jumped about a foot off the floor. It was quite a sight, you know, a dignified university professor gravitating upwards unexpectedly at the sight of me. And he said, "Whoa, what is it with you today?" And it wasn't just him, it was other people. People were giving me double takes. They would smile at me and then look and smile again so widely. And I was grinning back, and like we all had some big secret and nobody knew what it was. And gosh, I think one of the most profound statements that day was a professor. He was from Korea, and he said something about starting my own religion. Absurd idea. I mean, we all know what happens when we start a religion. It immediately degenerates into something else. So not such a good idea, but he was saying something like, "Oh, your ideas are so good. I would join your religion if you would start one." And I had lunch with a psychologist friend that day, and he's so scientific. And he said, "Do you mind if I touch your hand? There's such an energy about you today." So I definitely related all this unusual response to my presence to that dream. And I'll share with you, after all, what is a dream? I'm more convinced than ever that a dream is another level of reality. And the fact that established professionals in the academic and intellectual community had a response to me that day that was extraordinary after I had the dream experience with the UFOs indicates to me that the two realities interpenetrated, and that, in fact, they always do with all of us. These are things that increasingly we're all going to understand and benefit from more. Well, that was an interesting month. I found myself being ever more centered and healthier and craving sleep less. At the time, sleep was sort of my drug of choice. I didn't have access to any sort of drugs, and I don't believe that drugs are any kind of a help to humanity really in the long run. So I never really had an attraction toward them. I had a curiosity about drugs because so many people seem to have difficulties with them, and there must be something good about them that initially attracts them, but we all know that the body can get ruined and the life can get ruined. And so this was never a problem with me. It was never an opportunity with me either way. And yet I had my addictions, such as sleep and coffee and food and emotional experiences, you know. And so I have great sympathy with people who are experiencing drug situations. I always feel that there's a good reason for why they have this craving, that there's a need in them that they haven't gotten met. And if only all of us who have any kind of addiction, whether it's a relationship or a substance or some kind of experience, if we can only get to the root cause of what is the need that we never got met, we may not be able to go back and get that need met, but we can recognize it, we can grieve, go through the grieving process, we can heal, and we can go forward without our lives being enslaved by unmet needs. This is relevant to this message today because I was in a state where I was sleeping so much. I was so depressed, disappointed in my life and myself through all of my unmet needs, real or imagined. Even if they're imagined, they seem real. And I found myself after these experiences not needing to escape life so much, which is kind of paradoxical, isn't it? Here I am having these otherworldly experiences, and suddenly I'm becoming better grounded in the earth. That's one of the reasons that I began to trust these experiences, because I became healthier and more committed to service on this planet. So let me take you forward to a date, another date I shall never forget. It was April 3rd, 1987. It was a Friday night. Once again, that unaccountable restlessness came over me, and I jumped in the car and started driving west, because that was the closest way to get out of town. I didn't know why, I didn't know where, but I just had to get in the car and start driving. So I headed out of town on a country road, and I think I'd gone about 2 or 3 miles when suddenly I saw it. It was a silver globe just hanging there in the western sky. Now, this was before sunset. This was different than the experience of 1981, where the luminosity of the object obscured the outlines of it before. This time, although it was luminous and lovely, I could clearly see that it was a globe, a sphere. And again, the serenity that it imparted, the beauty, the timelessness, the peace, is something that's very difficult to describe. But here I am driving on a country road, looking out the windshield, seeing this enormous silver globe hanging in the sky. There was one other car on the road, and I've always wondered, did they see the same thing? I honestly don't know. I never received any information on that. Some of my sightings I have confirmation on with other witnesses. And some of them only I have seen, even when I've been with other people. That's because I sincerely do believe there are different levels of reality, and it depends on where we're tuned in. But this was more physical than metaphysical. And suddenly, a curved shadow began to pass across it, which suddenly speeded up, and then the whole thing disappeared. I got the feeling that it might have rotated and then disappeared. It was very hard to tell. I thought back again to the sighting in 1981. That one, by the way, in the meantime, an article had come out in the paper, and not only had 2 teenagers seen it, but 2 police officers had clocked it as hovering there for 90 minutes. So it's very possible on that first sighting, I could have stood there for almost an hour and a half partaking of that beauty. But this one in 1987 happened within a couple of miles of driving. So it was a much briefer experience. But the feeling was the same. However, along with this serenity and peace, there was a tinge of excitement. And I think it's because it was daylight and I was driving and my heart rate was really speeded up. You see, the paradox of something so beautiful and yet something so strange, both parts of me were activated here. You know, mentally I'm going, what is it, what is it, what is it? Trying to categorize it, classify it, and because I can't do that, thinking, you're insane. And then the other part of me, the mystic, the artist that's in all of us, is saying, isn't that fabulous? It's the most wonderful thing ever. So I was trying to reconcile these 2 parts of me as I was driving, and I suddenly realized I was on the road that would lead to that field outside of the village where I lived as a child, the one that was featured in the dream in March. So naturally, I I headed out there and I thought, I'm going to find something. I'm going to get to the bottom of this. I'm on the way to that field. I'm certain I'll find something there.